All right. Well, like I said before, guys, thanks for coming. I thought it was the last session, but I was told it's not. But I know you've been drinking through a fire hose of information all day, so we're going to hopefully get through this material pretty quick for you so you can ask any questions. We're going to spend some time today walking through a couple of case studies so that we can walk you through our design process, our research process. We spend a lot of time up front in our design process thinking about personas, target audiences, and how that kind of connects with business goals, and then how that kind of overlays on user interface design and things like that. So we're going to walk through a couple things there. We're also going to talk about communications between development team and design team. Yeah. I'm sure you guys have had challenges in the past with some communication there. So we're going to share with you a couple of tips and tricks that we've built into our project process, our design process, to bring that communication level together and make sure that design intentions are carried through on the development side too. Okay. Before we do, real quick, just a introduction, if I can get this thing to switch. My name is Andrew Goldsworthy. I'm one of the co-founders at Rooted. We are in the Bay Area, and we focus on working with nonprofits and social businesses. I worked for a really long time in nonprofits, and then I decided I want to work with nonprofits instead. A little bit more fun. I did a little bit of front-end development as well, so have always sort of had a hand in the design process. And right now I work a lot in marketing strategy and marketing technology with our clients. Val's going to take it from here.
Hi, I'm Valerie. I'm one of the other co-founders of Rooted, and my background is both in design and in education. So I actually started as an art teacher on this journey until I moved into this all stuff. So now I've been doing brand strategy and art direction for almost 20 years, and I really focus on building community. And so a lot of the work and our philosophy as an agency is about helping our nonprofits just build a like-minded community and supportive community that can really amplify their missions. And I think all of that is really transferable to the corporate sector as well, which I actually worked in the car industry for a number of years, so I do have some of that corporate experience also. And now I serve on, well, now only one nonprofit board, but I've also been a founding board member of a few too. So I've sort of worked on all sides of the nonprofit sector, and that really infuses into the work we do, and thinking about we're a teaching agency and that we want to be teaching the nonprofits to build their own capacity. So as Andrew said, we're going to walk through our design process from start to finish as quickly as we can. Obviously, it's something that is more robust than that. But starting with research and surveys, we front load a lot of our work at the start so that we can really understand the nonprofits that we're working with. A lot of times I call it my sponge phase, where I'm more than just the liaison between their organization and our own, but how can we kind of infuse ourselves and really understand from within them who they are, who their audiences are, and really, dive in deep. We then take that information, we turn audiences into personas, figuring out what's going to actually motivate people to interact with an organization and through their website, and then take that and turn it into the wireframes, hierarchy, and workflows. From there, I'm going to sort of take a step back and go into a few design best practices, because that's one of the reasons I was asking if there were any designers in the room, because oftentimes people don't have, you all didn't go to design school. I may be the only one who did here. So, giving some of those tips and tricks that are like color theory and typography and the quick things that you can understand, so that when you're making that button on the fly and you're not asking your design team all the time to do it for you, that you know some of the basics to make that more successful. And then the last piece is the dev handoffs, as Andrew said, like going through what we do as a design team to try and make it as easy as possible for our dev team. So hopefully you can take that back and say, hey, here's some tools that you guys could use to make our lives a little bit easier. So that will be what we go through. So starting here, I want to do a little bit of a case study and walk you step by step through some of our work with this organization called Pacific Environment. And the first thing that we really did with them was identify all of their audiences and take kind of a deep dive. Then we did some interviews and surveys and really understood what the expectations were, not just of their individual audience members, but what the organization's expectations were of those people. And so here, and I realize this is kind of small, but you can see this is one of the spreadsheets that we have, and we have all this stuff on our website as well in different blog posts, so you're more than welcome to take these and use them yourself or pass them along. Yes?
Will these slides be available?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so we're happy to, as we said, we're a teaching agency. We're happy to share all of this stuff. But when we're going into our audience descriptions, we like to take a super deep dive and get into the granular information, because these are real people. And if you start with real people rather than broad strokes, it's much more effective when you are going through and sort of making assumptions later on, because you know those assumptions are based in something that's real and tangible. So we go into behaviors, things that they do leisurely. Where do they go to, eat or shop or things like that? Where do they find their news? Really understanding them as individual people, and then thinking about the obstacles. What are the things that are going to bring them to the organization in the first place, for example? So once we've done that assessment, we move into our creating surveys and creating our interview questions. And these ones are super basic, so I'm just showing you the general things that we have here. But for example, what the role someone has in the organization, what topics they're interested in from that organization. When it gets into marketing, things that they've seen be successful versus not, depending on the stakeholder, obviously. So we go in a most generalized way through internal executives, internal board member, and then turn that around and helping this organization in particular create survey questions that they could then blast out to all of their constituents to get information as well. And I reiterate the need for research because oftentimes if you don't spend this deep dive up front, it ends up with something that's just really superficial is what it comes down to. And so if you don't dig in, and now Andrew will talk about as that moves into analytics as well, it just, like I said, it's not going to be as worthwhile in the long run.
Right. So as Val said, we spend a lot of time doing stakeholder interviews, one-on-one interviews, doing interviews that can be sent out to the masses. But one thing that I think is often overlooked when doing research is analytics. Oftentimes, obviously, you can't see that particular user and you can't sit down with them and ask them questions, but there is a lot of really incredible information in Google Analytics if you start digging around and taking a look. So you can start to see behaviors, trends, anomalies that you can say, what the heck is going on here, and start to think about it and start asking people about it. So a couple of things that I think about when I'm going through Google Analytics. Number one, I always like to work backwards from conversions, right? So if, let's say, a conversion is to sign up for a newsletter, I want to only see the traffic on the site that has taken that action, right? Why do I want that? Because it stands to reason that is the type of person that we're targeting. So I want to see how they act, where do they come from, so on and so forth, right? Segmentation is really important as well. There's two things there. One is that you can start to compare different types of users on the site, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. But you can also filter out the noise. I know a lot of people get into Google Analytics and they see just numbers everywhere and they're like, what's important? I don't know. There's so much. Fire hose. Segmentation really allows you to hone in on the things that are important to you, and you can start to filter out all that other noise. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Third is demographic information. A lot of people know Facebook for being very accurate in understanding user demographics in terms of their interests, but actually Google Analytics over the last 5 years or so has really improved their demographic information. And obviously you get a lot of accurate information about location, device use. They also have information on gender and age, which some people, obviously, they don't have that information on, but some people they do. And then the final thing, and we'll dig into these more, is analyze data and traffic by marketing channel, right? So things like, what is the dominant channel where different users come from? How do they behave differently based on where they come from? How does each channel kind of fit into your engagement strategy, and how does that play out on the website? And then sort of which channels are most engaged with you at different levels. And we'll dig into that a little bit more too. So first, let's talk about segmentation. Where do you find it? How do you use it? So on every single report, if you go to the top, you can filter through all of these predefined segments. You can also create custom segments. So for instance, I could compare traffic that came from San Francisco versus traffic that came from Los Angeles. Or really, you can create all kinds of custom segments. So this is great for comparing and contrasting, and again, kind of drilling down and getting rid of that noise and only looking at the things that matter. Okay, and again, as I said, my favorite segment is taking a look at traffic that has already converted on the site. So you can take a look at how those people are reacting and moving around. Some other common ones are like type of device, type of users, so returning users versus new users, the channel that they came from. And if you haven't done it before, I'd recommend just going in there and taking a look around. There's a lot of really cool stuff there. So what does this look like? What are you looking for, right? So I pulled some data from a client of ours, and you can see here that I'm comparing Facebook traffic versus Twitter traffic and how they've converted on the site. So you can see right here, it's pretty clear Facebook is probably where a lot of their target audience spends their time, right? Or they're doing a really good job marketing there. But this to me is something that stands out, right? And it's probably something that you should put into your user profile when you're doing research. Location information. So you can filter on country, state, region, metro area. And I know that not all of these particular demographics are important to every business, but you might just dig through here and find something that you didn't know existed. Like, why are all of our customers coming from Wyoming, or something like that. So just wanted to kind of point out that it exists. And I think it's really cool that you can do it by metro area. It doesn't necessarily have to be by like geographic lines. Device, really good overview of what's going on your site in terms of what devices are being used there. Some of the things I like to think about in this section is, are mobile users converting more, or are they browsing more on your site, right? Where are mobile users coming from? Are desktop users converting at a higher rate? And then how does device kind of fit into your engagement strategy, right? Are you advertising on only a mobile platform? Are you targeting cost per click advertising only on desktop, and how does that affect what's going on your website and how people are acting? So again, it's just a really interesting thing to start digging into this stuff and seeing what pops up. And then finally, taking a look at acquisition channels, or how people are coming to your website, like organic search, cost per click, things like that. Things to think about here and ask yourself during this research process are like, where are new users coming from, obviously? What channels produce that first engagement step, right? So if you have sort of this engagement plan for your customers or your constituents, which channel is providing that first step? Which channel is providing the most value? Maybe it's a purchase, maybe it's a sign up for a membership, or whatever it is, because oftentimes those things are different. And you can start to think about, all right, on my website, this particular area is really where new users go. This is where they're going to take their first engagement step with me. So after we've gone through surveys, data research, you basically have what we call target audiences, or audiences, primary audiences. What we're trying to do is take those audiences and mesh them together to what are called personas, okay? If you haven't heard of what a persona is before, it's a semi-fictional character that basically represents your ideal customer, all right? What we're trying to do is group these people by their motivations, by their behaviors, and I really want to talk a little bit more about motivation, because I think that's really important. In marketing, there's this saying that you sell the hole, you don't sell the drill. It's kind of a funny saying, but basically the idea being that you're really looking to sell a solution to a problem, or a solution to a motivation. You don't sell product features, right? You sell an end state, essentially, at the end of it. So when we're building personas, we want to think about, what are their motivations? What are the desired outcomes? And when we're thinking about motivations, there's really kind of three that are common. This is not an exhaustive list by any stretch of the imagination, but problems, common problems or fears are a great motivator for a lot of people, even consumers. Community is a big one, and I think one of the best examples of this right now, or in the last couple of years, is CrossFit, right? So going to the gym by yourself is really boring. But people are seeking community, they want motivation, they want accountability for their exercise routine, and it's fun. So community can be a big motivating factor. And then one that's fairly commonly known, I think, is like prestige or status or emotive outcomes. So if you think about the clothes that you wear or the cars that you drive, or if you don't drive a car at all, right? That's a reflection on who you are as a person, the type of people you want to associate with. So all of this goes into that research process, and Val's going to hop back in and talk about the case study again and what came out of this process.
Thank you. All right, so as this being a nonprofit organization we're working with, we really ended up grouping their audience members into these three personas. And you can easily translate your professional giver, NPO ally, into some kind of customer. And in the for-profit world, influencers and connection seekers pretty much translate directly. But what we found is in so many ways these three tend to, in all of the nonprofits that we work with, there's some form of this persona, but we still have to make sure that we start with the nitty gritty and get here honestly. We can't just jump to this, right? Yeah, there it is. That's going to be always the thing. Yeah. And so we just found that these ones are really successful. Here you have your NPO ally, an executive director of a large foundation, has spent time in development and communications and in a variety of different roles. So this is someone who could also be an influencer, but the reason that they're different is because what's motivating them to come to the website and what they're looking for is different. So, and then your influencer is someone who's a leading expert. In this case, it was someone who was a policy expert because they do a lot of Pacific Rim work across multiple countries. And so you really need these people who are want to align with you, so they're interested in your partnerships and what you have to say. And then here our connection seeker, who is deeply involved in lots of nonprofits but has access to financial capital that he likes to put places. So he's not only vetting, but he wants to feel from his heart. And so his motivation, though, could be similar to the other two. It's really about making connections and feeling that sense of community. So what we do next with this information is we go back into our spreadsheets and we itemize them out. What their different descriptions are, their demographics, their current desires, some of the information we had looked at before, but now it's sort of honed together into a nice little grouping. But then the two new questions that we're asking is, what do these people need to find on the website / what are they looking for from this organization, and what does specific environment want them to do? What is the conversion that needs to be happening here? So that's our next area of focus where we're trying to get tactical. And as we were looking at before, did I leave this one? Oh, good, I did. I couldn't remember if I took this out or not. But honing in on Denise, who is the NPO ally, the things that she's interested in here is a clear sense of the credibility and leadership. And this is what we then directly take and are going to turn into our information architecture. So I'm going to repeat this part a few times as we're going through. They want information, they want to understand issues and actions that are happening, what's the model of this organization. And then the third thing, and I put here, to a lesser degree, they want to understand the depth of impact the organization is having, but they're more focused, sometimes we even call this person a measuring stick, because they really want to know the numbers. And then what does specific environment want from them? They want them to join on social media or follow, sign up for their e-news, and ultimately they want them to request a proposal, right? Because you want the foundation to call you up and say, give us a proposal, we want to give you money. Or they want some sort of partnership if they're consulting with other organizations that this person might be involved with. So then we take that, and once we've gone through our whole spreadsheet, we sort of bring that down into some bullet points and into some things. And these, change for each organization or company that we might work with. But we itemize out the hierarchy for each of the personas and what's most important to them, and then kind of average those out a little bit. So you can notice some similarities. You know, the professional giver, the model, is most important, but in second place across the board is partners, which means that partners need to be pretty high, even above the fold on your website, because everybody is interested in your credibility and legitimacy. And then our issues and regions and stories sort of move around, with impact data sort of pushing further down below the fold. And for them, cultural appropriation is very important. So that's sort of a tone that ends up being a thread throughout all of their messaging, because we do a lot of work with messaging as well. And stories tend to be toward the bottom. So you'll now see how that ends up getting implemented into the actual hierarchy of the website. So here's how we started at the top. We had our, sort of cliche slider here at the top that has information. But here, still above the fold, we have this information that's the model of their organization. Over here, we have a quote of a partner. So you've sort of elevated your partnership and what they're saying about your organization pretty high up there, since partners were super important. And then here we get down to the issues and regions, so the things that they're actually working on. So it's sort of both model and what am I doing and who am I connected to. So you're hitting all of the people's interests there. On this next one, as we now get below the fold, we have these new areas. So here we have our impact data, since that was important, but it was okay for it to be below the fold. Here we did it as sort of like a timeline slider, which was a little bit different, but for them they have all this beautiful photography that we really wanted to highlight. We were trying to play around with that idea. And then here we have our stories. For all of them, stories were important, but again, it wasn't the very top thing. The other thing to consider is that in the navigation, that your person who's the people that are most interested in impact data and just getting to the nitty gritty are oftentimes just going to go straight to the navigation. So really you want all the things that are interesting to them to be above the fold, because that might be all they ever see. So just that little side note. Here we had our stories, and we kind of laid them out in different ways and used a tagging system to really highlight where and what type of information or issue this was a part of. And below we put their the issues and regions that were most important for their organization, so that at any point on the site you could always kind of say, well, I'm interested in coal and what they have to say about coal, and you could click and see everything, from all the different parts of their site they had to say about that. So now I'm going to hand it back to. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Here, let me go back for a second.
On the navigation, often, when it comes to the information hierarchy, we spend a lot of time deciding the navigation. Can you give us some advice?
Yes. So, and it can work in a couple ways. I'm going to start with the choice we made for a Pacific environment, because it's actually unique, and I wouldn't make this choice for everyone. But the reason with them, we actually tucked, and you'll see it better in the designs, but the navigation's actually tucked away, but then they ended up with just a couple call to action buttons there at the top. And for them, they tend to have very tech savvy audience members, which through all of our research we learned about them. So we knew that it was okay to tuck their navigation away into a hamburger menu, and then we made it multi-layered, because then you could actually see all the information on their site. But in terms of what they were wanting, and what became clear through all of our research, is that they wanted their site to be a more curated experience based on issues and regions, rather than on your typical information architecture that you might normally find. So that's why we actually tucked a lot of their tucked almost all their navigation away, so that someone would come in and really peruse the site in this more organic fashion. You don't make that choice for everybody, right? This was unique to them. For other organizations, in terms of choosing what those maybe 5 navigation items are going to be, it really has to be based on your personas and what they're looking for, because your measuring sticks are going to be looking for your about page or partnerships, or it depends on what kind of company we're talking about or organization that we're talking about. So that we really choose based on those things. Like, do you need to use a word like impact because you know that one of your key stakeholders or your key like supporters, that's where they're going to go look for things, and then we organize appropriately under those titles based again on their motivations and how to like work them into the right workflow to that to that conversion point, because it's always about like taking them from what they're wanting to where you want them to go. So that's a lot of how we'll decide those kinds of things, but it's so unique to every organization, even though there are standard pieces.
I'd also add into that, that's a great time to start looking at whatever data you might have already on an existing site. That's a great place to start. You can start to see how people are moving throughout your site. How you, again, similar to what Val said, how you might be able to take the information they want and lead them to where you want them to go, right? So it goes back to that research process. Okay, so hopefully this does not offend anybody. The concept here being, you know, as I mentioned at the outset, communications can often be a big challenge, right? People talk in different ways. They use different language to describe different things, and the decisions that they're making are in different context from one another, right? So when we're talking about communications between design and development teams, you know, we obviously, I think probably anybody that's been in this world long enough has probably run into some challenges there. We've started to think about some sort of rules of thumb and how we could apply those to our project process to help this along, right? So some of the things that we ran into was, number one, obviously, don't rely on assumptions. We all know the saying about assuming. Check in early and often, right? So I'll talk about how we've implemented that in the project process, but designers, bless their hearts, have a great way of coming up with a big idea that takes you down this design rabbit hole that you put it in front of the developer and they're like, what the heck is this? And then ask developers, don't ask them, is it possible? Ask them, is it hard? One of the things that we realized was that, as our partner Jason says, anything's possible with enough time and budget. But what we're really asking is, like, does this thing fit into our budget, right? We know you can create it, but we don't have a year to do it, and we don't have $1 million to do it. So ask, is it hard? And ask why, right? If they say that it is.
So we're telling you this is what you should tell your designers to ask you.
Yeah, exactly. And then try and establish some guardrails, right? And I think, as I mentioned in this next slide, the sort of shift to component-based design and development, I think, has helped a lot in that particular realm. But some of the things that we've done in our project process to help this out is, number one, we do kind of what we call the dev sniff test on basically the first or second round of prototypes that we do. And we usually do it before we show it to the client, because we want to say, hey, is this hard? Tell me why it is. You know, we're trying to like accomplish X and we have this much budget to do it, essentially. So getting developers involved in the conversation early is really critical, I think. As I mentioned before, component-based design and development, I think, has established some really good guardrails in terms of letting designers know like what's in the realm. I think also it gives you a sense that if you go outside of that, it's okay, but we need to have a discussion internally about why, and then we probably have to have a discussion with the client about, hey, this is why we think this is better, but it's going to take a little bit of extra time to do it. And then the other thing which I don't have on here is specific to Drupal, is that a lot of times we'll try and make that component library really focused on and centered around what the Drupal UI or markup is developed kind of out of the box in some regards. That makes things a little bit easier. We don't always do that. And then finally, when transitioning from that design phase to that development phase, we basically have a big internal meeting, walk through all of the technical specifications, go through all the designs and everything like that. So again, the concept is that everybody's on the same page, even though they might have different contexts and different ways of explaining things, people can communicate. There are guardrails that if you go way off the guardrail or way off the road, that's well, hopefully it doesn't happen, basically. So Val's going to jump back in and start to talk about designs and then hop into some of the best practices for design too.
So one thing I wanted to say, just following up on what Andrew was talking about, is that, and we'll talk about this again later, but when the design team is transferring our information into like what makes sense for developers, there's like this clear, what I've learned, and this is partially because I'm married to one of our developers, that I understand that like I'm a creative person, and so I'm a little bit more random, and like he is very literal. And so when I ask him questions, like once I really understood, and this is after like now years of marriage and more years of working together, that I really understand how linear I need to be. And I think that's sort of the communication conversation that can happen, that it's explaining how literal you are to somebody who is not. And so that's just sort of an interesting thing that I've kind of grasped over time. Okay, so once our wireframes are done and there's been our sniff test and we are all on the lovely same page and we've started now turning this into design, it's time to take it back, not just to the work group that we're working, the client's work group, but getting them to then take it out to external stakeholders. Because some of the key things that happened here once this like first round of designs came about was these are like subtle differences that happened, but they were still key. So like here you'll see, you know, the partnerships, like we turned this into a clickable slider so that now more partnerships were going to be shown. We had, you know, that there's always the need for like donate and sign up, which we had throughout the site, but once it got back out to the external stakeholders, that became elevated in terms of the conversions that they wanted to happen and when they wanted them. So then things like this that came now like right at the edge of the first fold, we then had our donate and our sign up fields appear, and then we actually turned, the mega footer was always there, but we started sprinkling in some other elements where we got this like click to tweet area. And then here at the top, the buttons changed so that they were really like focused in the conversions that they wanted to happen. So again, because this was a more organic site that they wanted a free-flowing experience to be happening for people, they wanted these conversions. They're like, you know what, we actually need to focus on individual donors, so we need some of these areas to now be more prominent than we thought. So from there, let's move into a little bit of color theory. This is a little image that I found, like, I don't know, probably years ago now, but I thought it was really good. And again, of course, happy to share these things because it's super basic, but really effective. These are your basic, like, what colors mean what, right? And then it shows you all the logos that use those things and essentially is telling you why they are, right? So, you know, you tend to have, like, in universities, tend to use a lot of blue. They want this trust and dependability and strengths. You know, when red is used, it's usually to, like, bring this sense of excitement and bold. The yellow gold, though, can be difficult for button colors if it's not dark enough, but it does give this optimism and clarity and warmth. And so that's why you'll see a lot of the time, like, donate buttons or buttons that people are wanting someone to press will be in this sort of like goldish orange color. So things like that to just be thinking about. For us, for Rooted, we chose this shade of green for like a particular reason. We're working with nonprofits. There's this, like, we want people to come to us and know that it's going to feel calm, that they're going to be taken care of, that we're going to help. You can't really see it well, but this says growth. We're going to help them grow and build, like, health into their organization. So those are, you know, it's one of those things where, like, some of these are older, some are new, but I just thought it was really great because it's not just about, like, what's the current trend and the, like, cool, fun, hip color that's being used. It's like, what really does that color mean? And, you know, what is it going to tell someone about you? Excuse me. The next slide we have here is I just pulled up a bunch of our sort of favorite Google fonts that range across from being sans serif to serif, and for those who don't know what that means, sans serif means without the little feet. and serif means it has the little feet. And so I put up ones that I just find have shown up well on websites and that we've been able to use in combination so that you're not like always grasping at a font or just choosing what you see in Microsoft Word or whatever. That these ones are, I mean, that happens, right? But that you can say, okay, well, I need something like Times New Roman, but Merriweather just feels a little bit more modern and hip, but it's still that like Times New Roman kind of, it's not quite, but it's in the direction, right? And the same thing like here with Muley, it has a roundness and it's sort of modern, but has a little bit of more tech kind of like feel to it. So anyway, we put these up and obviously we'll share them, but I just wanted to give a sense of like, these are fonts that are strong. Like from a typographer's perspective, they are strong fonts that have some personality. And it's not Helvetica all the time, which, don't get me wrong. Like if you've seen the movie, I love Helvetica actually, but these ones have a little bit more personality and are still modern and timeless at the same time. Okay, so I want to show you some of this now put into practice. This is another organization called People Power Media, and I didn't include some of their branding, but I'm going to explain it a little bit anyway. This is a relatively recent Drupal 8 site, and the font we chose here was Futura because it has a kind of action-oriented feel to it. You'll see Futura ends up being kind of everywhere sometimes. Like there needs to be a new movie like Helvetica about Futura. Sorry, I'm a little bit of a type nerd. Okay, so the idea here was something that was modern, clean, action-oriented, and like super legible, right? So part of it across a variety of reasons, which we'll get into accessibility and that stuff in a minute, but we wanted something, they're a news site. So they're showing housing-related features, and in this case, they've built this like illustration animated series about the housing crisis in San Francisco and Toronto and the Philippines, I think, are the three areas that they focus on, which seems a little random, but it's the places they've lived, so I think that's why. But then the colors we chose were, this red, and when we go back to the emotion, you get this like bold excitement, right? They want people to be like excited about the work that they're doing and to want to be a part of like a movement and having everyone's voice be heard. And then their logo is yellow, and you don't necessarily see it worked in here, but for them it's the optimism and clarity that their news, they're very clear, they're direct, they're unbiased, they're showing both sides of something, and so those are the things that they were choosing. We also wanted a composition that just felt like there was space to breathe, and oftentimes things get really like compacted when you're trying to get too many things on one fold, or people want too many like call to actions, and it's one of those things where there gets to be so many stakeholders or so many cooks in the kitchen, and we all understand that piece. So that goes back to like why you go through the audiences and the personas and the research, because then you can go to the stakeholder, go to whoever the boss is, be like, this is why we're making this choice, and it's grounded in something that they can understand and feels tangible, and it's not just like, no, you have some ground to push back on. The last thing here was high accessibility. Obviously, we want to build things that are accessible to all people and screen readers. So things like high contrast. This is one of the biggest mistakes that I see with buttons oftentimes, is people will choose colors that are not high contrast. So my rule of thumb is like, if you can look at something and squint your eyes as small as you can get them so that it's as blurry as you possibly can come up with, can you still distinguish those letters from the background? If you cannot, that is not a good choice. So that's why it's, a silly trick, but it works because I can stand back from my monitor and I'm like, okay, I can still see those well enough from one another. The other thing is choosing your hierarchies for your H1 through H6. And often, and we'll get into how we then set this up for the dev teams later, but things like, obviously screen readers need to read it that way. And the other trick here is like, here's our smallest, and you'll notice that the things that are all caps only have 2 to 3, at most 4 words. Like low literacy readers can, and people that are low literacy cannot make out easily words that are in all caps. You need to be using upper and lower case letters. And so that's what we've done here. Only for like headings and then these teeny tiny subheadings are we in all caps, and everything else is upper, so it's easy to read. It's okay for buttons, again, if you can have, you know, 1 or 2 words, but don't have a sentence for a button, which is obvious, but you never know. This next site is another Drupal 8 site, and here I wanted to show this one quickly just because I think we successfully use 3 different fonts on a page, which is a huge no-no. Okay, like, and I'm showing an exception for only one reason, which is here we have our serif font. We're using the sans serif font. However, these are all the same family. This is Merriweather, and it's sans and sans serif, which is how we're sort of nudging my rule. But general rule, do not use more than 2 different fonts. And that, you know, font fan, but we're smudging here. Here because this this project, the perpetual lineup is about like your privacy and biorecognition and things like that. And so blue is used so that you trust that this is like, you know, a trustworthy source. It's very black and white to be clear and distinct. And then going back to our navigation, again, we're breaking some nav rules here, but it's for a very good purpose. This is a very long form report, like super long. So we wanted to have our navigation here on the side and sticky so that it follows you down the page and you can figure out where you are and move to the next sections appropriately. So, you know, again, always when you're breaking rules where normally you want your nav at the top and sticky and following, like, there has to be a good reason, and trying to convince your designers, ask them, why are you putting the nav there? Is that grounded in audience data, that this is a choice and not just because you think it looks cool? Because that's not, you know, I'm a way too pragmatic designer for that. Okay, let me see. That was it for that part. Okay, so now, any questions there before I continue? Just realized I'm starting to go fast because we're getting close. Okay, I'll go fast. So here we go into the tips of our dev handoff. We use Zeppelin and Sketch as our main 2 tools for design and transfer of our style guide. If your designers are not creating style guides for you, I can pass along a quick checklist of things that they just need to give you to make it easier, you know, like the basic rudimentary basics. But these things work really well to be able to translate headers and body text, hex codes, building out your style guide, and I'll just kind of show what that looks like if you haven't used Sketch, and encourage your design team to use it because it's Photoshop but like so much easier. And what I do is, when our design team is done, and you need another set of eyes. If I'm the designer on a project, I cannot make the style guide. It's not a good idea. So what I try and do is have our design team finish, and then they hand it over to me, and whatever styles that they've created, I essentially delete everything and I start over, and I spend like an hour going through all of the templates and making sure that everything is consistent before we hand it to the dev team. Because designers are creative. Like they're doing their best to make things consistent, but it's never consistent, which I'm sure all know. And so you need another set of eyes to actually audit the design documents before they move over. So that's what we do. We go through and we recreate all of these things, and you can figure out how your best descriptions go. We try and describe because our development team is okay with us describing and it not being like 100% perfect what we want them to use. It's okay for it to be a little bit, you know, we want to empower them to take it from here. And they know that. So that's part of our conversations also. And then if you haven't used Zeppelin, this is what it ends up producing. It even will do components, which you can also do in Sketch, but I'm just not showing that here. But it's great because then you get all of your headers, you get all of your color palette. Hopefully whoever audited your designs has pulled out any colors that are too duplicative, and I realize that there's 3 blues here, but that's because Georgetown has those 3 shades of blue. And then here it just gives you your nice like CSS notes. So it's just, you know, if you aren't familiar with it, it's a great tool and just makes life so much easier. And that's pretty much it. I know, were you going to do a closing part? Okay. So that's pretty much it. Does anyone have any questions or other thoughts? And we're, as I said, happy to share all of our stuff for you to use. Yeah, please.
I actually have two. I'll start with one.
Okay.
So one was based on, so I also work in UX strategy.
Okay.
Do a lot of the research in the beginning. And I know you can group people into sort of like the detractors, passives, and promoters. And it sounds like you guys are focusing on conversion based. Is that because, right, there's another school of thought that, hey, focus on the detractors, right? Because those are the ones that really need to come around. I just want to make sure it's for the case of personas.
Right.
If that makes sense, you're doing that work for personas. But just
Interesting. Yeah, because we certainly do have clients that focus on that. I was thinking about Slap. I don't know if I have a good answer for that.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to think of, it is a hard one.
I think where I come at it is you're always like there's going to be a bell curve, right, of people that you can address and get on board. And so there's always going to be people that buy your product or like what you're saying. There's always going to be people that hate your product or hate what you're saying. The people you really should be shooting for, I think, are sort of that middle where they're convincible. So you can focus on things like overcoming objections if you're an e-commerce type thing or whatever types of things you're trying to get people to do, but focusing in on those objections that the middle of that bell curve may come up with. And, you know, as they say, haters are going to hate, so what are you going to do about it? No, but I think, you know, there are certainly, I think, like, with the detractors thing, I think that you do have to somewhat overcome some of their arguments, but they're never going to listen all the way, you know.
And I mean, one thing that I think is interesting there, and this happened with INM, thinking about, so one of our clients, the Institute of Natural Medicine, like they have a lot of people who are not bought into naturopathic medicine, right? And so one of the key things when we were redoing their website was trying to answer some of those questions up front. And that legitimacy piece became the very first thing that you see. And then even the titles we chose for their navigation were much more clinical in the wording that we were pushing them to use, and for that very reason. But it was still, and I think this might also just be like a philosophy piece for us, is that, you know, as I said, we're about educating, and so some of it is just a matter of educating properly or giving people the place they can find the information and then choose the next piece in the decision tree, and that might be leaving. But then you're filtering out, and I think this is part of, in my mind, of how we build community, is, like Andrew said, starting in the middle and then trying to, like, you know, lift everything up and just let the people fall away. Because, I mean, why work that hard? Another question, or you can ask your second one.
You're up.
I think you can.
You're up.
with personas, because I feel like that's usually the first one to fall off, right? When you're sort of trying to make a case for UX, which is hard because it is really grounding. But one thing I've sort of tried to start doing is do it as a collaborative exercise. And for remote companies, that's harder to do. But I was wondering if you all.
Yeah, in fact, I took a slide out of tips for building personas because I didn't think we had enough time to do it. But one of them is do it in a group and take like 20 or 30 minutes, sit down in a group, because everybody has a different touch point with those people. So they're going to understand maybe something different about that relationship or about that interaction. So I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, we've used spreadsheets for it when it's been remote cases. So we're a remote shop too, and our clients are across the country. So we have sort of like a workshop that we've done both remote and in person, where it's like, I literally have sent people like, okay, print this out and cut them into squares. And then we're going to, you know, push them together. But we've also done it in a spreadsheet where we're literally like they've put in all their audiences, and then we've just started moving the lines around on the phone until we've gotten them into things that are sort of a grouping, and it works, and it's, you do it for maybe 40
What's
minutes.
that Post-it tool that we're using? That's a really good collaborative.
Real-time board. If
Real-time
you haven't
board.
heard of real-time board,
It's pretty cool. It's just like a
really great.
digital sticky Post-it note board, and anybody can be on there and move things around.
Yeah. So it's great, better than Google Docs. So we use that for site mapping now, actually, because then you can all be moving your Post-its around on the virtual whiteboard. So it's great.
Cool.
Anything else?
All right, guys. Well, thank you for
Thank
coming.
you so much. We appreciate
Enjoy the
it.
rest of your evening.
Will you close